Welcome to This Explainer. You know, some cases just fundamentally change how we look at the world. Today, we're stepping into a deeply unsettling, yet incredibly important piece of history that permanently altered how America views serial murder, systematic failure, and our justice system. We're going to examine the crimes, the institutional blind spots, and the dark legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer. All right, let's dive right in. Picture this. It's a humid night in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 22nd, 1991. A man named Tracy Edwards is literally running for his life through the streets, and one of his wrists is still locked inside a pair of handcuffs. He flags down a police car, absolutely terrified, and tells them a man had just tried to kill him. Now those officers, they had absolutely no idea they were about to uncover one of the most disturbing crime scenes in modern American history.
So that brings us to the absolute core question of this explainer. How had so many disappearances gone completely unnoticed? How did a man living in an ordinary apartment building manage to remain free and totally undetected for so long? To figure that out, we actually need to jump right back to the beginning.
Chapter 1. The Escalation, spanning from 1978 to 1991. To really grasp this, we've got to step back 13 years to Ohio, to a teenager named Jeffrey Dahmer. Born in 1960, he committed his first known murder in 1978, right after high school. The victim was an 18-year-old named Stephen Hicks. But I want you to think about this massive, chilling gap in the timeline here. Years passed. Dahmer went into the army, was stationed over in Germany, came back to civilian life, and for a long time, there were no known murders. But that first crime? It taught him something terrifying. He learned he could kill and he could successfully hide what he had done.
By the late 1980s, Dahmer is living back in Milwaukee, and a very clinical, terrifying pattern starts to emerge. He'd seek out young men in public places, offering them money or companionship. Once he got them back to his apartment, he would incapacitate them, kill them, and then actively conceal the crime. He wasn't just a troubled teenager who made a horrific, isolated choice anymore. He had evolved into a highly organized repeat murderer.
But here's the thing. That wasn't the only opportunity to stop him. Think about the era we're actually talking about. No smartphones, no modern DNA databases, no surveillance cameras on every corner. Investigations depended almost entirely on conventional police work, physical evidence, and paper records. Back then, a missing person could easily just fade into a mystery. But for a series of disappearances to actually be recognized as a warning, well, someone has to be willing to see the pattern.
Chapter 2. Institutional blind spots and the victims who disappeared.
So, why wasn't this pattern seen way earlier? Well, this is where the systemic failures really come into focus. Many of his victims were young, marginalized black men, deeply connected to Milwaukee's gay community. And sadly, those social circumstances drastically affected how authorities responded. There's one incident that brilliantly and painfully illustrates this. In May 1991, police found a disoriented 14-year-old boy named Konarak Synthesomphone outside Dahmer's building. Dahmer actually convinced the arriving officers that it was just a private domestic matter involving an intoxicated adult. And the police? They just assumed he was telling the truth. But the reality was that this 14-year-old was in mortal danger, and another victim's body was literally already hidden inside that apartment. The officers actually returned Konarak to Dahmer, and tragically, he was killed shortly after they drove away. That specific incident became a defining symbol of the dangers of assumptions, inadequate procedures, and total failures to recognize vulnerable victims. Now, the officers involved were later disciplined, but the severe backlash raised massive, unavoidable questions about policing, marginalized communities, and racial tension in Milwaukee. It proved beyond a doubt that this wasn't just a story about a serial killer, it was a profound story about institutional failure.
And you know what police found inside that apartment just 2 months later? It changed the case forever. Remember Tracy Edwards, the man running down the street from our beginning? When he escaped in July 1991 and led officers back, they didn't just find a single crime scene. They found photographs, human remains, and overwhelming physical evidence of multiple murders. Suddenly, years of fragmented, ignored missing persons cases violently collided into one massive, terrifying reality.
Chapter 3. The 1992 Sanity Trial, Madness versus Method.
Because Dahmer actually admitted to everything, the jury wasn't deciding if he committed the crimes. They were deciding something far more complicated, his legal sanity. Let's break down this fascinating legal battle. On the defense side, psychiatrists argued Dahmer suffered from severe mental illness. They pointed to his disturbing fantasies and this progressive, compulsive behavior that he supposedly couldn't control. But look at the prosecution side. They focused heavily on the deliberate planning, the specific victim selection, the deception, the concealment. Their crucial point was this. Because Dahmer deliberately took calculated steps to hide his crimes, he was entirely capable of controlling his actions. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he chose to do it anyway.
So, on February 15, 1992, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the verdict came in: legally sane. Under Wisconsin law, a mental diagnosis alone doesn't automatically mean someone is legally insane. A person can be profoundly disturbed, yet still fully understand their actions are illegal. Consequently, he was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms.
Chapter 4: Prison and Final Years at Columbia Correctional Institution.
Now, Dahmer's story shifts behind the cold walls of a prison, but it didn't stay there long. We jump forward to November 28, 1994. You see, his immense public notoriety didn't buy him any power on the inside. A fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver, who later said he was deeply angered by Dahmer's disturbing and mocking behavior, attacked and killed him with a metal bar. Just like that, Dahmer was dead at 34 years old.
But honestly, did that verdict, or even his sudden violent death, actually answer the biggest question of all? Why did he do it? No, it didn't fully explain his psychology. It definitely didn't explain why earlier interventions by the police completely failed. And it certainly didn't erase the unimaginable, permanent damage inflicted upon the victims' families, who were left navigating a reality that could never be undone.
Chapter 5: The 17. Remembering the Lives Taken.
There is a different and frankly a much more important way to look at this history. Instead of focusing on the perpetrator, we absolutely must center our focus on the staggering, heartbreaking human cost: 17 lives, taken over the course of 13 years.
Let's just take a moment to respectfully remember them. Stephen Hicks, Stephen Tomey, James Doxtator, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Raymond Smith, Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Strouder, Errol Lindsay, Anthony Hughes, Konarak Synthesymphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Bredehoft. The people he killed deserve to be remembered as more than victims of Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a massive trap the true crime genre often falls into, right? The killer becomes world famous, and the victims are reduced to mere statistics. But they were sons, they were brothers, friends, neighbors. They were human beings with entire futures that were just stolen from them.
We've walked through the timeline, the evidence, and the truly profound institutional blind spots of this case. But the absolute biggest takeaway this explainer leaves us with is a haunting warning for our future. When vulnerable people disappear, when assumptions replace actual, rigorous investigation, and when obvious warning signs are completely ignored, who is truly held accountable?